Hi everybody, my name is Norm, the LabVIEW Evangelist, and I'm grateful to be here to talk to you about the latest features in LabVIEW 2026 Q1. We've got a great host of things in store to talk about that are new, and yeah, let's go ahead and just dive right into it. Now, as we've stayed consistent over the past several years, the themes and the pillars that we're building our software off of are strengthening our software across the workflows, connecting those workflows between the rest of the software, not just LabVIEW, but definitely across LabVIEW Plus suite, and then also building the community. And so thank you for all the community members that continue to help NI be the company that we are and improve LabVIEW and help you understand what it's capable of day to day. So for LabVIEW 2026 Q1, there's a few main focus areas that we're going to cover today. First off, probably to nobody's surprise, we're going to touch on the features of Nigel AI within this latest release of LabVIEW. We're going to talk about project-wide debug settings. This is probably going to be the most impactful for those of you out there that program LabVIEW on a daily basis, all of the things that we've done to try to help that workflow go smoother. Just a minor security enhancement that's going to make sure that, once again, this whole idea of modern CRA and security issues, that we're trying to make sure that we're bolstering that strengthening of the software. Continuing to push forward and supporting third-party languages like .NET, and then also getting into continued investment in the CI/CD workflows, continuous integration, continued deployment workflows for software engineering purposes. And lastly, one of the ones that I love is our newest brand new front panel control for it is a web control, and you'll see what that means. So stick around to the end and you'll see that demonstration. Okay, so diving into Nigel. Nigel is going to permeate all of the NI software over a large period of time, but for right now, in this release, we're still just targeting mostly 2026 Q1 LabVIEW and 2026 Q1 Test Stand. However, you're going to see very shortly how we're going to continue to push beyond even the bounds of the software and go to the system level view that Nigel has some kind of awareness of and can give you advice and assistance for that. Now, one thing that typically comes up when Nigel is part of the bigger conversation, so I wanted to pause and talk about it, is security. Is Nigel secure? Are you training your models based off of the information that I give you? And the short answer is that I want to give you today is yes, your data is secure. There are things that are local on your system. There are things that are going to the Nigel cloud service, but in no way are we taking your data and training our model based off of that. And there's a variety of other security related concerns that I know that a lot of people are interested in, but we've got a variety of webinars on Nigel that if you want to go down that further, please go ahead and check out the other Nigel things that you can find out on YouTube or like ni.com webinars, all those different places. They dive into a lot more detail around it. But absolutely, Nigel continues to be something that we are keeping security at the front of our mind in terms of making sure that your data does not go where it's not supposed to. So speaking of what Nigel knows, let's talk about what Nigel knows new within this feature. In particular, Nigel knows your LabVIEW project. It has the ability to go ahead and, just like it did in the previous release, ask me about, or you can say, describe my VI. Well, now you can also describe the whole project. And it's not just about describing the project, it's about giving Nigel the ability to understand it and then ask questions like, hey, what libraries or drivers do I need to go ahead and actually run the code in this project? What's missing? That's a really common problem that people that inherit code run into of like, hey, it just says that I'm missing a file, but what driver does that need to come from? Or what toolkit does that need to come from? Ran into that the other day myself. Very, very useful. Especially another one is if the project maybe isn't arranged very well. You can even say, what's like the top level VI in this project, or what's the thing that's needed? Or even to give you a graphic of like the arrangement of libraries. These are all things that Nigel now has the ability to do because it can, you've said, describe your project. And so Nigel can look at that. And it's just going to continue to get better as time goes by, as we continue to add more features. But that is Nigel knowing your project. Now, continuing on this theme of, once again, we had in the last release the VI, and now we just talked about the project. Nigel also now knows your system hardware. So the other thing that's really helpful is if you're in a project, if you were to, or just doing anything, and you wanted to know what hardware, either your hardware or third-party hardware, instruments, or even serial ports connected to your computer, hey, what are the settings for them? How many do I have? What's the model number? What's the driver? Heck, even what's the calibration date? These are all things that you would need to go to a different piece of software to try to determine. Like you would have gone to Max or the hardware configuration utility to maybe look at your serial numbers or your calibration date. No more. You can just ask Nigel directly. And you can even get something as fundamental to your computer as like, what's my IP? Sure, there's other ways that you can go about and get that, but now once again, it's staying in product. It's helping you get to that information that's critical to the job faster. So next time you've got Nigel open, go ahead and start asking it about the hardware on your system so that you can actually get the job done. Actually, even the drivers associated with it too, I found that one helpful. So another thing that's seemingly minor, but really, really helpful for all of us out there that do a lot of different prompts to AI assistants and chatbots and such, is the ability to go back and see your history. And so now that is a brand new feature in 2026 Q1 as well, where just by clicking in the little hamburger in the, I think it's in the upper right-hand corner up there, you can now see your previous chats, pull them up and continue the conversation with Nigel, which once again, if you've got projects or VIs or in the middle of trying to figure something out, can be a huge time saver. And so the last thing to talk about in this latest release is one of our newest, flashiest features that we just implemented, where Nigel is now starting the process of being able to create some LabVIEW code for you. It's making suggestions for your overall code base. And so what you can see happening here is I've got a terminal on my front panel that's called frequency. And well, you know what? Rather than go ahead and see how it works right here, let's go ahead and open up the example and see it work live. All right, so I've got a LabVIEW project already open here. I'm gonna go ahead and open up that VI that we were just looking at a moment ago. The only thing that I've got really on my front panel is just a control called frequency. So it's not really giving Nigel, I can't ask any questions based off of that. But one of the things when you're using Nigel AI to try to get code complete to happen is that it's going to look at your block diagram, what's already there. Now that could be already existing code, or in the case of what I've got here, I very clearly put the prompt onto the diagram for what I want. And so that's what Nigel's looking at, what's already there in terms of code or comments. And based on that information, it will try to go through and make a reasonable suggestion. So simply by clicking on a terminal that is outputting a signal, I can go ahead and click on that little glyph that we've got there, that little star, and Nigel Code Completion will start to figure out, based on what's there, some suggestions of what you might want on your diagram. Now, of course, it's an AI model, so it's going to come up with different things, but lo and behold, we've got a pretty good result right here. And you can see it's giving us a bit of a rationale. Hey, you wanted to go ahead and build a signal with, telling me that it knew, like, what was it able to devise or divine from the diagram. And it already set my offset to 5 volts. It gave me a ripple of my signal to, let's see, 100 millivolts there. And really the only thing left to do for me manually after the fact is to go ahead and set my sample rate and frequency. But let's go ahead and see what some of the other suggestions were. So there you go. So another pretty reasonable suggestion where instead of it being just a sine wave, it uses the function generator, a little bit more flexibility. And this one looks like it, so it's doing a little bit more raw. It's doing it point by point. So 3 pretty reasonable responses that you can see how it is looking at that input that I've got on my diagram to do it. And so really, if I wanted to move forward from here, I might do something, I might leave that there, but I might leave another comment like output to CSV, and I might continue that process once again, just by continuing to put the prompt on the diagram. That way it tips off Nigel of what it is. Or I could put the full description of what I want up front and then just get suggestions one little bit at a time and assemble my program that way, presuming that once the suggestions are in line with what you're looking for. So be sure to go ahead and give out that code completion a try next time you've got Nigel open as well in 26 Q1. All right, so we covered Nigel. A lot of really neat features. Once again, it's not just LabVIEW, it's your system, test stand, and we're pushing out to the rest of the LabVIEW Plus suite. But for what we're going to talk about, talking about your system, is as a LabVIEW developer, one of the most impactful things that you'll run into on a daily basis is the way that you work with your editor, specifically when you're debugging. Some people say that 70% of the job is active debugging of what you've created, regardless of language. And so the more that you have with LabVIEW to debug even faster, all the better. And so in 2026 Q1, we've done some very specific things that are my absolute favorites. One, we've enabled you to enable or disable debugging across your entire project in just 1 or 2 clicks, which is just phenomenal. We've also given you the ability to retain the wire values across a hierarchy. So that means that the last time that you run your code, you can leave that setting on, and after everything's done and complete, you can jump into the code and see what those last values were. Another thing that's really helpful is the ability to, speaking of the probes that you would have for the values that are in there, now your probes are actually persistent on your VIs instead of going away the moment that you close your code. You have the ability to have breakpoints retained without necessarily flagging your code as edited. It's a big, big, big change in terms of that debug flow. And then the introduction of this new file type called LabVIEW Project State, or LV Proj State. So let's go ahead and get into the code and see this live in action. Let's say I've got a simple logging project. I created this one from the sample projects, like when you launch LabVIEW, and I create a new logging example. So I'm going to go ahead and open the VI. And if I were to just basically run it, you'll see I'll just use the basic operations. I'll stop, and I've got settings. So nothing too grandiose, and I'll stop the VI. Now, if I wanted to, something didn't happen right. Of course, I would get into the code, and I might want to debug some piece of information like, oh, what information is going into this specific dialog? But one thing that you'll note is that I've got some probes there. We'll get to that in a moment. But all of my debugging tools are currently turned off. So of course, now what I would do? Well, I would have to go, traditionally, I'd have to go into the VI settings, I'd have to dive into menus, and eventually I'd be able to indeed allow the debugging on my system. But that's, of course, a VI by VI example. So now on the project itself, merely by right-clicking your target, in this case, it's my computer, I can open up the project environment settings, and very quickly you can see I can enable debugging for all VIs on my computer. Simply by doing that, now you can see that I've got debugging turned on this individual VI, and if I press Control D, which brings up the debug window, you'll see that I have all of my probes as well. So there's two different demos that we've got for you right there, where we have persistent probes, right? I just opened the code, it was closed, but those probes were already marked where they should go on it. And indeed, even if I go into a sub VI, you'll see that they're also available there. Once again, a very, very useful tool for working with your debugging. So beyond just the enabling all of the probes or debugging on all of your VIs, the ability to have the persistent probes. Another thing that's very useful as well is if you haven't dropped probes. So imagine for a moment that we went through, and let's just go ahead and delete all of these, and we're going to go ahead and let the program run. So of course, same thing, stop, exit. But after the program's completed, I can't really go in and probe after the fact. You can see that's marked as it didn't run, except if you were to go through and turn on the option of retaining the wire values. Now, once again, that used to be a VI by VI or code by code tool, but now we've got the great ability to go ahead and set it or remove it for the entire hierarchy, which once again is a massive accelerator in that debug workflow. So let's go ahead and set on the retain for the whole hierarchy. I'm going to go ahead and run the code there. Of course, same thing, let it run, stop, exit. And now if I were to go ahead and hop into, say, a different chunk of code right there, I should be able to probe that right there. And you can see that the value is retained for that execution. And so that's going to be, once again, a huge accelerator for anybody trying to get into different spots of code where you don't have to know exactly what you want to debug ahead of time. It's your project that you're debugging. And so we've enabled that. So huge, huge accelerator. Let's see. So some of the other things to note of how we're enabling that that's worthy of noting is that a lot of those debugging settings used to be part of your overall, once again, the VI settings, but now we're starting to save those in a different directory that you can exclude from your source code control, which is once again an accelerator towards your development cycles. All right, so speaking of changes to your VIs, we know that the modern LabVIEW developer likes to do good software engineering practices using source code control typically, and it's usually very helpful to be able to compare one kind of check into your source code control to another. And so we've been constantly improving the feature set within VI comparison or LV compares. And so some of the things that we'll look at here in a moment is that now within the report, we're giving you an overview of your front panel and block diagram, giving you the ability to have custom descriptions, laying out what's shown a little bit smarter, and then also being smarter about kind of your free floating text labels that you have attached to other things. But once again, let's not just look at a slide, let's see it in action. All right, so as you can see, once again, we've got our logging project open, and as any good software engineer does, I've got it checked into source code control. And so within my environment, I've already set it up to be able to do a difference or configure comparison for LabVIEW between different things. And what I'm looking to see is like, hey, in this specific checkout, let me do a comparison by simply going into external diff in LabVIEW. And now it's going to go ahead and pull the needed source code. That's once again, that's just the tool that I'm using in terms of how it works. It's going into LabVIEW compare to go ahead and get the necessary files. And now we have the ability, that showed up on the wrong screen. Let's go ahead and pull it over onto this one. And we can see some of the comparisons that it's making. Now, in this case, I merely modified an unbundle node to get some values from my signal afterwards. And so some of the things that we've got, once again, are some smarter feedback in terms of what's actually changed on things like the bundle and unbundle nodes. We're being a little bit more intelligent about, even in the report, one of the things that I had mentioned of, hey, we're going to go ahead and create a report from this. This is possible interactively or via something like a command line interface as well. But now I can say that, I change notes for bundle node. There you go. So now I'm going to go ahead and save that. Replace the one that's already there. It goes through to create the report, and I will go through and open up that document. And now you can see a few of the new changes that we've got. First off is hey, we've got basically an overview. So depending on if it's a large VI or small, you can have at least some insight as to what you were starting from. And then of course, we've got the same type of elements that we were looking at in, say, previous releases that are available there, including the new description section that you can see that has also been added into this. So there's just a few of the new features that we've got, once again, in terms of doing the comparison itself. I think that's the bulk of what we've got for this release. If you want to know if any one of these features, I'm going pretty quick through most of it. So be sure to look for those featurette videos that'll be coming out probably in a few weeks, where I'll go into even deeper detail about each and every last one of them. But if you're an active user of LabVIEW Compare for various different reasons, you should be happy that we're continuing to invest in that workflow, improving it, and giving you more control over what's displayed in the report and how it's actually displayed during that comparison cycle. So speaking of source code control changes, one of the also new features that we have in 2026 Q1 is the ability to have LabVIEW monitor your files for external changes. Now, this might seem rather strange. Why would it do that, or why would you change your files externally? But for anybody who uses source code control, you know that it's not an uncommon task to move between branches of your code. And of course, you want LabVIEW to be aware of that, and then of course to possibly reload an entire project based on those files being changed on disk. And so luckily in 26 Q1, we've enhanced that workflow. When you have a file change on disk, as you can see right here, when I just simply modified between those two VIs that you saw compared a moment ago, that it prompted me, hey, here's the file that has changed. What would you like to go ahead and do? In particular, reload the project to make sure everything is working okay. Now, some of the other things that are helpful for this latest release as well is that we will check, it's a security enhancement to check for untrusted code. So you may have seen this happen if you're using Windows. I don't know if it happens on other OSs as much, but if you download a piece of software and then you try to run it on your computer, you'll get a warning saying like, hey, this code was downloaded from the internet. Do you trust it? Do you want to run it? And the exact same thing now we have enabled for your security within LabVIEW itself. It's actually referred to as the mark of the web. I hadn't heard about that before. But when you get a file from somewhere off the internet, it has that flag internal to it. LabVIEW now checks and will prompt you, do you want to go through and approve or accept that VI? So let's go ahead and see what that workflow looks like now. So what I have here is an example that I downloaded from the web that goes ahead and does something. But I know that the code isn't broken. I wrote it. But I can see that indeed the VI is currently being flagged as unrunnable. I'm trying to load from an untrusted location. And you'll see a new option down here in the bottom that says Manage Trusted Files. Now, if I go ahead and click on that, it's going to scan what's available. It's going to let me know that, hey, this entire directory has a bunch of VIs that I don't want. I might not want to run exactly, right? You never know what's out there wild in the web. So I'm going to go ahead and apply those changes on there. And then after that's done running and I've accepted those changes, you'll see that now I can go ahead and run the VI and look across the various different things that it might provide. So some interesting visualizations, but now the VI is marked safe for use. All right, so speaking of calling out to third-party things, one thing to mention in this latest release is that we continue to invest in enabling .NET 8 or .NET Core capabilities. Of course, I think it's like an 8, maybe it's even at 10 at this point in time, where once again, we are attempting to get parity with .NET Framework capabilities. So in this release, we've got a few different things that are particularly useful, but rather than talk about it on the slide, once again, let's look at the code. All right, so what you can see here is basically a similar example for .NET that we had open last time, where we could now call .NET callbacks, as you can see kind of illustrated here. But the thing that's new in this release to, once again, try to get parity with .NET Framework is a few different ones. So one, we have the ability to do a conversion, kind of up and down cast to the different types. And speaking of type conversion, we've got the ability to go ahead and convert back and forth to variant. This matters a lot to people using .NET assemblies because it provides for a type agnostic or a .NET agnostic boundary between different parts of, say, your framework or your plugin code. So once again, a lot of people out there using .NET Core are probably pretty happy about this. And the last one is, once again, kind of on that debug workflow, you can see that we've got, if I let this run one time here, that now the actual probe associated with that .NET Core assembly is now smarter. It's not just a 32-bit number. Now we're actually giving you, while you're debugging your .NET assemblies, a little bit more information about the actual data prototype that you're looking at. So we're kind of interrogating that, and once again, making that not only developing easier, but now also debugging with .NET Core 8, 9, 10, and on kind of situations that much better. So speaking of, now that we got through .NET and calling other assemblies, let's talk about workflows associated with CI and CD. In particular, we're continuing to invest in the ability for you to run DevOps or do proper software engineering on things that you're creating with LabVIEW, things that have deployment schedules or regular integrations. Some of those things that we know that have been problematic or challenging over time is the ability to run LabVIEW headless. So what does that mean? Well, it's actually running LabVIEW and preventing any pop-up from showing up at all, from doing license checks, from doing a variety of different things that would impede automated processes for software engineering. Well, now with basically the addition of a small -headless tag when you're launching the LabVIEW CLI or LabVIEW.exe, you can now be assured that LabVIEW will indeed run headless, whether it's on Windows or Linux or on and on. And the other thing that we've done is not only have we, in the last release, made a Linux Docker container, once again, so that you could use that to automate your release build process. But now we actually have a Windows Docker container, as you can see illustrated up here, directly on the Docker Hub website. But rather than talk about it, let's go ahead and see what that looks like right there. So if you were to go to dockerhub.com NI/LabVIEW, you will see that you can actively go and see that we have our specific versions of LabVIEW and distributions available for you to integrate. Now, for me, myself, I like running my Docker instances locally on my computer. And so I've got Docker desktop on my computer, and you can see that I have the specific Docker image there. If I were to go ahead and just kind of kickstart this in the background, in just a moment, LabVIEW is going to be spun up in a headless instance. And you can see that if I needed to, I'm now interfacing to that Docker instance that started up by itself. Well, it was basically, I told it to start up. It's now ready to receive commands to do whatever I need for that automated headless execution. Once again, usually for building your systems or deploying it or distributing it or doing, say, unit testing in an automated fashion. So a lot of features out there. I think this one actually was one of our community members, Sam Taggart, that had done this general request for that. If I'm wrong, sorry about that. You can put it in the comments and let me know I was wrong. All right, so you hung with me to the end. Hopefully you did at least. And I want to talk about our brand new control within LabVIEW. We now have the ability to integrate a web interface directly and natively on your LabVIEW front panel, and with the added benefit of being able to interact with it through JavaScript. So one of the best ways to show this off is interactively, so let's go ahead and get into the code. All right, so you can see that I've got my example here giving us the ability to view a web page locally. This isn't just a picture, this is actually me logged directly into one of the examples we're going to see here in just a minute. So some kudos to the GitHub creator for this that we're going to see. But if I just wanted to use it as a basic web browser, right? I think some of you might be wondering why or what's the value of having a web browser locally in a LabVIEW front panel. Well, you could just use it as a regular web browser. Of course, you can kind of, once again, pan and zoom around and interact with it as you might, right? You can give somebody the ability to do www.ni.com/LabVIEW. Do that, and of course, you're going to see it load as you would expect. So we could technically make a LabVIEW web browser and do all the features of LabVIEW, but that's probably less the case where most of you are going to use it. However, it is particularly handy. Something that might be a little bit more practical for us out there is maybe you want some form of interactive documentation on your system. You can see I've loaded a PDF into the web browser. Of course, we know most web browsers, if not all, can load a PDF nowadays. Well, now your LabVIEW front panel has a very easy way of displaying that. Once again, you might have been able to do this before with, say, .NET controls, but now this is a native cross-platform, single implementation, one control that we have within LabVIEW. So that you've got, hey, I've got these values up here. Let me go ahead and tune them down to the things that I have down low and be able to reference that accordingly. And so that might be a very realistic situation where you would find a lot of value in having that web browser in the display that you're already working with your data. So another example that you might choose to use this web container for is maybe just using it to display different JavaScript or web-based elements that you can interact with now, once again, on your LabVIEW front panel. What we're looking at here is a plot from Plotly, and I think it's a JavaScript component that you can integrate in, and you can see that I'm on that same LabVIEW front panel doing different forms of interacting with the data, almost as though it was a LabVIEW plot, but now that I've got it directly on the diagram. And so that's particularly useful as well. Once again, expanding your front panel, allowing you to look at things maybe a little bit more modern. If you have somebody who is capable of creating web pages that, of course, host your information. Now, another thing that's particularly useful here, let's say, talk about displaying of information. One of the shipping examples is this right here, where it's not only showing displaying information, but it's getting, so this is not a web page. This is, I've integrated a JavaScript video player. Of course, it's from YouTube showing one of the LabVIEW getting started videos. And what you might notice is that, of course, there are different chapters. As I kind of move this over here, you can see that's the string palette, that's the control palette. And so you can see as I'm moving along throughout this video, LabVIEW is getting JavaScript events from the web page and from the JavaScript that we've created. Now, this can be really, really, really powerful for somebody who understands, once again, that you can have a web page, you can push JavaScript or inject JavaScript onto it to have the web page respond to different things, and it will communicate back to LabVIEW based on different things that you might do on the page. In this case, it's just merely changing where you are in a different video. Maybe you want to make an integrated training course or training service using, once again, LabVIEW. And so that's something that I'm actually working on, where I can have now a web browser and a video, and I can also have it work with LabVIEW simultaneously, which is, once again, particularly nice. But if you want to go all the way and you want to say, hey, I have somebody that can go ahead and do a full, I think this is called React by Node.js. So you can see that I'm actively connected. Actually, it's even telling me that LabVIEW has now been connected to that web page down there in the bottom. And now I've got the ability to, say, work with the controls on the page to do different behaviors. Of course, this is a very flexible interface, as a web interface is likely to be. And so we're taking advantage of that same kind of display elements through a created web page, but now I've got it on my block diagram. And one of the things that you can see, maybe if I move some things around here on the page, you can see that this page as well is firing events back into LabVIEW about the things that I might be changing, where you can see that LabVIEW is now being informed that the user has requested a motor speed change. This is all being enabled through the ability to do not only the loading of the web page, but to interact with that web page through JavaScript events and kind of a command injection, as it was. All right, so that brings us to a wrap. This has been a really nice release to get out the door. It's got a lot of great features. I love the debugging ones. I'm really loving the web interface as well. It's kind of an unleashing of my creativity and also needing me to learn JavaScript, which is okay. But hopefully there's something in all of the list of things that we've gone through, be it from, once again, Nigel to .NET or security and on, that's going to make a difference in your overall development. So be sure to check out the latest release, download LabVIEW 2026 Q1 today, stay in touch, find us on the forums, and let us know what you think about these new features. Is it what you're looking for? Are you waiting for something else? Let us know in the comments below, and we'll talk to you then. Thanks.